welcome to Elvenhome and to this edition, which concentrates on two things: the second part of the build of the church, and particularly the painting of the church, and also the remediation work that needed to be done on the platform because of the problem of the ATF bumping into it. Can I just here, because I forgot to do it in the sections when I recorded about the platform, just say thank you to everybody that gave me thoughts about what I might do to the platform, and in particular to Stephen Riley, who sent me some really useful photographs about how sharp the curvature at the end of platforms was in real life in order to fit them into the track plan, which persuaded me against a simpler approach than scrapping the whole thing. But first of all, let's get on and take a look at the church, which I completed last time round. As you can see, I've started the process of painting the church. All that's on so far is one coat of primer, and I did that primarily actually to see what imperfections there were in the build of the church. I don't know if it's the same for you, but I always find when I think I've built this wonderful thing that the moment I start putting some paint on it, I notice all the imperfections in the process. And what I did discover, as I thought was the case, that there were places where, for example, if I turn it round, the roof here, it hadn't stuck down. I hadn't stuck it down properly. It couldn't do it itself. There are places where I just hadn't held it long enough to properly bind, and so that needed a bit more glue to stick it down and fill the gap. There were other places where there was a gap for whatever reason. Some of it was down to me not looking carefully enough, and for that I was able to use this stuff, which is Vallejo acrylic resin plastic putty. Very, very useful stuff. Nice and runny when it comes out, easy to manipulate into gaps, and then obviously sets off hard and can be sanded and generally sorted. So there was quite a gap running down here, which is gone now because the putty's gone in there. The reason that this is looking a bit dishevelled, of course, is that having put a coat of primer on and then started doing things, including putting some masking tape to hold things down, it's pulled the primer straight back off. So I'm not too worried about that. Generally, the primer's gone on very well, actually, and dried rather nicely. And it was always going to get a number of thin coats of primer to give me a good base on which to start doing the proper painting. And of course, I don't want it to be too thick because otherwise it will mask all the detail in the brick. But if I bring it in, you can see the primer is taking quite nicely there. So what I'm going to do now is just give it another coat of primer and see what it looks like when that's fully dried. And then we can start work on painting once I've decided what colour this building's going to be. A little sort of chapel like this, it's obviously brick built. I think it's probably going to be grey. I don't think a red, why would they build in red brick up at High Elven when pretty much everything else is in grey brick? So I think I'm going to go for shades of grey, a bit like I did with the signal box, because I just don't see it being red. But let's get the primer on and get it fully primed before I start worrying about what colour goes on elsewhere. You'll recall in the last video that I was concerned about the extent to which the platforms were being clipped, occasionally by the odd wagon going by, but most particularly by the 8F with its wider outside valve gear. And the only solution was to amend the platform. I did worry at one point that I would need to do some pretty severe changes, but in the fact, once I took the platform off and put a piece of paper down and looked to see where the valve gear, how far it was going over at the end, it only needed this change to this end of the platform. I've done the same at the other to make it look the same. But also, if I do need to adjust the positioning of the platform, I can do that without too much trouble and without it then clipping the end of the other platform. Whilst I've got the platform off the layout, I thought I'd take an opportunity just to show you, for those who weren't following the channel when I made this platform and its canopy. The platform is simply a Metcalfe kit. There's nothing particularly special about that. The canopies are also Metcalfe canopies. That's from their kit. It's a 24 bay. If I come out here, you'll see the length of it. It's a 24 bay canopy, which is 6 of the Metcalfe kits. That's not cheap if you want to follow it. I wanted to do it, and I'm lucky enough to be able to afford it. So, but they're not cheap, those canopy kits, but they are beautiful. And I think the detail, if I can go in a bit, see if I can get it to focus, the detail on them, there we go, really is lovely. And I think that it's a superb kit. The station buildings, I made, they're just light card that's printed using essentially a word table, and then filling in what would be the lines with the various colours that I wanted. So there's the waiting room, which is right at the end here. Then you come down to here, which has the entry to the gents and the ladies, and also a parcels office, and down here to a restaurant or buffet and the station master's office. And that fencing is the fencing that goes around, as you can see there, the ramp through which parcels and post and newspapers are brought from the main platform through and up onto the 2 main platforms. I thought I would also let you see the other side. This is the side you don't normally see, because of course it's away, it's facing, you're going to sit upside down. This will be fun. But as you can see, that's decorated in the same way. And the stickers are all, I think they were Railway Scenic stickers, if I remember rightly. No, they're not Railway Scenic stickers. I'll put up here afterwards who made the stickers that I was using. Now, the next thing that's got to be done is to get this back on the layout. I should say, taking it off the layout was pretty much okay. Only one wire came away in the taking out, because there are some very fine wires. If I go in here, you can probably see, there we go, the little fine red, those very fine wires, and most of them held up being drawn back out of the hole through which all the wires go below the board, except one, which was on this lamp here. So I resoldered that, and then I thought I'll just test whether it works, forgetting that the lamps at the end have resistors on them, because they come from a 12 volt supply, and that brings the power down for the 3 volt bulbs or LEDs. All these other lamps are 3 volts, but they go through a power distribution board, and so I picked up a 9 volt battery. I can tell you that my soldering was superb, because there was a bright white light, a loud pop, and I'd blown the LED. Fortunately, I had some more of these lamps in the drawer, so I had to completely take it out and rewire in a new one, and I'm not testing that till it's on the layout. Thank you very much. So I'm going to get this back on the layout, and we will see, once it's done, whether it's cured the problem. Well, we're a few days on now. After the last time you saw this, it did get another coat of the primer, which is no, that's off-white. Let's try the surface primer, which is the Vallejo surface primer, which I'm rather pleased with. I think that's working really rather well. That may become my primer of choice. I have since, only this morning, painted the walls of the church, for which I've used Vallejo blue-grey pale. Very interesting. When it goes on, it's much lighter, and I thought, well, that's quite nice and light, and then it's darkened down, but I think that may be okay. I've left deliberately the roof and the top half unpainted, because obviously that gives me something to hold on to whilst I'm painting the bottom half. The intention now is to get some of the London grey, which is what I've been using quite a bit of, and I'm going to water it down just a little bit to apply a coat. Now I'm going to do this as a test first on one wall, one end wall, which will be easier to put right if it all goes horribly wrong. I'm going to paint it over in the normal way that it's done, let it dry just a little bit, and then dab it off with a towel, paper towel. The reason that it's a test is I want to see if this is robust enough or whether it's going to take all the paint off. Because that's my, it is a problem with brass I've found in the past, that the paint can chip off very easily. And in fact, if I bring this into camera, you can see in the roof there's one tile has shed its primer. Goodness knows what it came into contact with. So this could all go horribly wrong, or it could work out quite nicely. I shall know in the next 10 or 15 minutes. You will only know if it's gone well if you see this in the video, because if it's gone horribly wrong, you won't see any of this. But let's see what happens, and let's get on and have a go at seeing how that wall comes out using this technique. Well, as you can see, the ATEF is now running, no longer route restricted, along the platform, which is back in its place. And I've got Flying Scotsman going down the other way. The platform is not yet fixed to the board. As you saw, it wasn't stuck down before, partly because I had this problem of sometimes having to adjust it. Once I'm absolutely sure, and I've tried enough different locomotives, that the present position of the platform is right, I will stick down the very ends, because it is useful to be able to get the whole platform off if I need to do any works. But hopefully, fingers crossed, I shouldn't need to do that again. And as it took me ages to creak around under the layout, it would be fine if there was nothing under the layout, but as you may know, there's various storage boxes and goodness knows what else that's under there. And of course, the screw that you need to work on is always the one that is the most inaccessible to reach. But there we go, the platform is back on, its ends have been changed, and I now can run trains without any fear of it biffing things as it goes by. So let's carry on with the painting of the church. Well, here you can see the finished church with its paint, and you may assume by this that everything went wonderfully well, and you would be wrong. I did use the technique that I said in the last clip, and at first I thought this is going well. But if you paint a building in different shades of grey, what you end up with is one very grey building, which when it had all dried looked dreadful. So at that point I was casting around what on earth I could do, and more in desperation than anything else, I thought I'm just going to paint it white and use the dabbing technique again, which I did. I just stuck some off-white paint on there and then started to wipe it off, but not too much. And this is the result, which is of a kind of faded, whitewashed stone building, which is in bad need of a bit of paint. Remembering my layout is set end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, so things were in a pretty dilapidated state one way or another. And I was really pleased with the outcome, that what I have now is a little church that was originally white, but is is showing its age now. So having completed the white paint, I put the London grey on the roof, so it's the same kind of slates as are elsewhere in that area, similar colour. The clock tower, or rather the bell tower, if I bring it in, you'll see there is detail on here, which you could pick out in black if you wanted, which would give it a kind of mock Tudor look. The only thing is, there's nothing on my layout that is vaguely mock Tudor, and I couldn't think of any reason why you would suddenly build a mock Tudor clock tower on this chapel. So you can't actually see the detail in the etch just painted white from the distance you would normally view it. So I'm going to leave that just as a whether it's white stone or brick, doesn't really matter. The overall effect, I have to say, I'm rather pleased. Once I'd finished all the white, I did then go over with weathering powders, which was the dark earth and the smoke, just to try to change the textures as you go round. And as ever, that really made a lot of difference. So the end effect I'm quite pleased with. A few things I've learnt in doing this. Well, first of all, I think I was probably wrong not to put the windows in as I was building. It proved quite tricky to get the windows in afterwards, particularly using super glue, which had a desire to stick to me rather than anything else. And in fact, painting the windows, which I had to do after I stuck them in, I had painted them, but bits of paint chipped off in the fitting. So it was, frankly, I might just as well have stuck them in and painted it all in one go. I did have problems with paint lifting. You'll remember in the last section, one tile had shed its undercoat, and using the brushing technique, there were places where it just lifted the paint off underneath. So brass takes quite a bit of care in painting by hand brush. I suspect if I had an airbrush, I could have put thinner coats of undercoat and got that to work. Everything I'd read said you don't really need etch primer, but maybe you do, I don't know. It wouldn't dissuade me from using another kit, but it's just something to think about when you're painting. I was going around touching up little spots of brass right until shortly before I recorded this. But I'm happy with this. From the distance that it will be viewed, I'm really content with it, particularly as a first brass building. That's the back, and I should show you the entrance with its door. I think that will do fine on the layout, and I'm quite pleased with the outcome. The only other thing I learned is that the paints that I got from Petite Properties, which is this soot ash which I was going to use, did not like going on the brass at all. I suppose it's not dissimilar to sort of house paint in a way, the Petite Properties stuff. And it works perfectly fine on card, indeed very well on card. It don't like brass. So that was something else to learn. But in general terms, I'm pleased with the whole thing. I think the kit went together well. I'm pleased with what I've got at the end. It's a lovely little chapel to put up on High Elven. And maybe I'll put it up there before the end of the video so you can see it, although it won't be in its proper surroundings. And for quite a while, actually. It'll be a while before I do the ceiling work up at High Elven. So that brings the build and painting of this brass etch kit to a close. So let's move on to the next section of the video. Okay, well you can see the chapel very roughly where it's going to be. I'm not going to be too particular about its orientation. St Eldar's is properly orientated so that the altar is facing to the east, and then the church sits appropriately on an east-west axis. I'm not so worried about this chapel, not least because if I do that correctly, I think, it will have the door on the opposite side. So I'm afraid artistic license is going to trump prototypicality. I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to put any lights inside the church. As you know, it's a brass kit. I suspect a light inside there will bounce around like nobody's business. But I can take that view when I come to actually start populating High Elven. As some of you may recall from quite a few videos ago now, the intention up here is to have a few workers' houses, quite small things, on something of a mound that was a legacy of a castle at one time. But I'm not intending to build big castle walls or anything. Maybe fabricate something that suggests the odd stump, perhaps a round tower that's just the outline of it. But it will mean the ground will rise up from about here up towards the end, and then I will work out how I blend the top to the bottom. I have some ideas, I just haven't quite worked out how to turn those ideas into reality. But I think the scenic work up at High Elven is going to come behind building the engine shed, which the next episode will concentrate upon. While I'm looking at the church, one of the people that commented, people generally seem to like the church, and I think it's a great little kit, about its scale and its relationship with other buildings. Roy Whitgrove, I think in particular, asked me that question. If I measure it using the Pico N scale, British N scale ruler, the church from the bottom of the wall to the peak of the roof is about 19.5 feet, which is probably about right. This is only a little chapel, it's not a great big church. When I put it against the other buildings, it's about right for a double height building, remembering you've got only one floor here, and that will go right up into the roof. The 7 model site does say that its N scale is 2 millimeters to the foot, and of course strictly British N scale is 2 1/16 millimeters to the foot. So they're not modelling to an international standard, but I think it looks right in proportion. It looks okay to me next to the pub, which is a more substantial building and is a 2-story building. But it is a point actually that came up, those of you that have been following Chandwell, Michael Scott's channel. Michael was grappling with an issue of having built correctly to scale a clock tower, but which just dominated the layout, and it's one of proportion rather than scale. And in fact, I've encountered that issue in relation to the gasworks. And you may have picked up from the last video, because some of it had been done, but if I zoom in a little, you may notice now that the gasworks has lost its substantial entrance and huge boiler house and incredibly tall chimney. I'll pop up here an image I took quite a while ago, I think before I'd even built the school, of what used to be there. The buildings are absolutely to scale. There's nothing wrong with the scale. They just dominate that area. So what I was managing to do over the last few weeks was to acquire the other buildings in the Little End Hornby range. Now these are 1 to 160, I think, scale size, but it was part of a kit. The items you can see right at the back, the diffusion towers and scrubbers and things, I bought quite a while ago as the start of the gasworks to go with the first of the gas holders that I built. And actually when I saw these on eBay, I thought they look much more in proportion, because gasworks were right in the middle of towns, but the buildings were just too big. So I've now acquired the complete set of the gasworks apart from the walls, and I'm going to build a wall that will enclose the gasworks. And the beauty of changing to that scale is that it's opened up the view of the school and with its side chapel, which were completely lost behind the buildings that were there before. So it is a point that you have to bear in mind, I've realised, that your buildings need to be in proportion to the space that they occupy. And a lot of the Metcalfe industrial buildings are undoubtedly in scale, but to be right, they need a lot of space around them. And the change that I've made with the gasworks I just like that area so much more. And it's opened that area up with nice sight lines through for the trains as much as anything else, but in particular for the chapel and the school, which goes in that corner. So that pretty much, I think, completes this week's edition of Elvenhome. If you've liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed, well, please do subscribe. It really will be great to have you along. And of course, let me have your comments. because I really do make use of the comments that people give me, and they were particularly helpful in dissuading me from scrapping my platform and rebuilding the whole thing to something that was more straightforward to do in terms of the change that was needed. And when I come to see you again in about a fortnight's time, it will be the 100th episode. So, well, have a think about what goes in there. I think more on the engine shed because I'm beginning to get clear how I'm going to build this thing, at least in theory. And it's about time that I shared some of that thinking with you all. So until I speak to you again in about a fortnight's time, that's bye-bye from me. Bye-bye.